Okay.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello. I believe we have gone live. Yep, it
This
says we're
is
live.
UpLevel Productions coming to you live on LinkedIn Live. And we are very happy to be here with you all today, aren't we, Rach?
Yes, finally. We had to postpone this event due to illness and a lot going on in our lives. I was not very well last week at all, and my voice had disappeared pretty much. So,
Yeah, and because UpLevel Productions work is all about bringing humanity into the workplace, Rachel was experiencing physical distress, and I had actually just come from the doctors with my mom and found out a really unfortunate diagnosis. So we were experiencing grief in different ways. And this actual conversation is all about grief in the workplace, which is part of UpLevel Productions' mission in bringing more humanity into the workplace. It's helping organizations be grief safe and ensuring that grief is part of the process so we don't have to compartmentalize ourselves from work and our personal lives.
absolutely. Yeah. So, when we talk about grief, shall we start with what is the definition of grief? What do we mean when we're talking about grief?
Let's
And
start there.
yeah, and an UpLevel's definition, which is the similar to many people's definition, is that grief is an emotional response to the experience of loss. It's an emotional response to the experience of loss. And loss can mean the loss of someone's life. So, someone that you love, someone, something that you love, you have lost. Or it can be loss, as in loss of a relationship, loss of a place that you lived, loss of a dream, loss of a goal. There are so many ways that you can experience loss. And as humans, we experience loss. So we call those living losses. And then obviously there's losses to do with death.
And over the past couple of years, our world has really transformed, and therefore the workplace has really transformed. And all of us are experiencing grief on some level, just like Rachel's describing it. Doesn't mean it's not necessarily designated to losing a person, but it can be the loss of how you used to live or the way you used to work, the way you used to be in the world. And so that's one of the reasons why we thought it really important to be having this conversation.
Yeah.
And Rachel, what else is important to you about talking about grief in the workplace?
Yeah. I mean, and I want to underline that what you just said, we've always, as humans, experienced grief. Pre-pandemic, we experienced grief. What we're wanting, especially at UpLevel, is for us to talk about it more. And we're going to talk about that more later. And actually, that's why I want to have this conversation. But why do I want to have this conversation? Because grief is part of being human. We are all human and we all experience loss a lot in our lives. And so, how do we make societies, communities, workplaces that are able to have conversations about grief, be more open to talking about grief? If you think about the pandemic, as you just mentioned, we've seen since the pandemic that people and organizations are more willing to talk about mental health issues. So, with that comes grief. Let's make it more okay to talk about grief as well in the workplace, in communities. So, really, it's about, for me, bringing and highlighting that grief is a human emotion, that it cannot be ignored, that we need to honor it, process it, we need to give it its airtime in order to allow it to process through you, first of all, giving it its airtime, and not cause other things to happen, such as depression, mental health issues, other issues, and being able to support each other as human beings, because we're all human beings having emotions all the time, with grief. So the best way to do that is let's start talking about it. And how do we start talking about it? Well, we equip people with the skills to talk about it, and we make it more normal to talk about it. So that's one thing.
That's one of many important reasons why we're having this conversation. Rachel is also steeped in end of life coaching and has a mission around really shifting the conversation and the context around grief, not only in the workplace, but in our home lives. Rachel, you want to say a little bit about your training and your personal mission around this kind of work?
Yeah, so it's been about 3 years now that I've really been immersing myself in, first of all, gaining knowledge and training and certification in being a grief and end of life coach. So I've gone through the whole process of doing training around it, getting certified, and working with people around grief and end of life. And that leads on to my mission now and my purpose, which is to take that knowledge and that expertise and spread it to the world. And when I say spread it, especially inside organizations, because as you know, with us at UpLevel, we're committed to making workplaces more human. And therefore, this is part of the mission of UpLevel. And so my purpose is to make sure that I'm talking about it, equipping people with the skills and making the world, organizations and communities more end of life and grief safe communities.
We know it's costing American businesses $75 billion, unprocessed grief in the workplace. And
Yeah.
we'll get more into the business case, why it's important for organizations really to look at training in this context, like Rachel just spoke about, and like she's taken herself through. And again, in the context of the new world we're all living in, many of us are still trying to operate the way we were 2.5 years ago, and we just can't. There's a general fatigue, and there is a general grief in the whole collective.
Yeah.
And so if an organization is really tuned in to their people and to what's happening in the world, they're going to start to think about, how do we create spaces where people can process grief? And we're never asking people to become therapists, and that meetings then turn into group therapy. But we are looking to organizations to create structures and processes internal that support the whole human. And acknowledging and managing grief in the workplace is why we're here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Why is this? I know this is also important to you, Christy. So why is it important to you that we have this conversation?
Yeah, and so what I just said, it's because we're in a new world, and because there's I think some people feel like they still have to operate the way they did 2.5 years ago, and we've all changed.
Yeah.
And that means the workplaces need to shift. And so UpLevel Productions is committing to providing these types of trainings and tools and conversations and content to help organizations bring more humanity into the workplace. I think about a story where I saw recently, where one colleague was consistently getting really frustrated with another colleague, and they would come into their meeting in the virtual environment, and the one colleague was not delivering the project on the milestones, on the timeline set out, and was just not showing up with the same energy or presence that they had previously. And the colleague started to really focus on what wasn't working. And there was a lot of negativity and reactivity brought to that individual. There was no curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening was there was a fight between the two individuals, because reactivity was met with reactivity. And all this other colleague really needed in that moment was some curiosity,
Yeah.
which is a skill that we train in our coach training programs, in our grief safe programs. Because if we can be more curious with each other, then we can pause a minute and find out what's really at the core of what's happening for each individual.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we negate that milestones aren't, if they're not being achieved,
Yeah.
and results aren't being achieved, but we need to take more time now more than ever to step back and get curious with each other,
Yes.
because life has also sped up, and each of us are experiencing these micro griefs, if
Mm-hmm.
you will, micro griefs, and we're not having the space or the skills or the people to process them and
Yeah.
create safety for them. So that's an example of why it's important to me is when I've seen this with colleagues, with clients, I'll often ask, so you're having conflict. How much curiosity did you bring to that situation? And if they went back and brought more curiosity, they often find out that something's really going on for their colleague. You know, they're suffering a health issue. Someone in their family is experiencing a health issue or someone's passed, you know? So this is why this is important, Rachel.
Yeah. And when you talk about those micro griefs, it's also this experience of what we call cumulative grief, grief that adds up, stacks up, cumulative grief, which is when people are experiencing losses, multiple losses. They're not allowing themselves or not having people to allow them to experience and process that grief. It's building up. And if you can think of like a barrel, a grief barrel, it's building up, it's building up, it's building up. And then the barrel tips over at one point, and that comes out in anger, aggression, illness, depression, all of these other mental health issues that we were talking about. So again, allowing people in those micro moments, and actually grief, the best way to process grief is for it to be witnessed and listened to. So when you say curiosity, you bring curiosity and then you listen. Those are one of the like basic skills of how to be with someone in grief, because grief wants a bit of attention. It needs some attention. It needs to be aired. It needs to come out and give it its respect, because it means that someone lost something that was important to them. So let it have its respect, let it come out. As we say, you know, emotions are energy in motion. Let the emotion come out, let the energy come out. And we're not saying that grief is just going to disappear like that. Grief is not linear. It doesn't happen like that. But giving it the respect that it's due allows it to not be suppressed and come out in the other ways that you were just talking about and we were talking about.
So that's great, Rach. And we're going to go deeper into what are some of the skills that you can train within an organization to create more grief safety. And so before we do that, let's talk about the tangible and hidden costs for an organization when grief is not honored or managed. And we've touched on this. So we know from our research that it's costing American businesses $75 billion.
And that was pre-pandemic. We know that number has increased, but they haven't done another estimate. So $75 billion before the pandemic. And then we know the $300 billion in mental health issues, which I strongly believe a lot of the mental health issues are coming from unprocessed or unresolved grief.
And it impacts retention.
Yep.
So when we are not creating spaces where people can bring their whole self, but we're expecting them to come and produce the results and show up almost more uniform-like, robotic-like, it impacts obviously the culture, it impacts the employee experience, and therefore the retention of top talent.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, the average number of bereavement days, if you lose someone close to you, is 4 days of bereavement. So after 4 days, you're expected to come back to your workplace and carry on as normal. This is if you've lost your husband, your wife, your child, your mother. I mean, 4 days, that's not, you know, just think about that. And I think that says enough. So what people then do is they end up having prolonged sickness and prolonged absence because they're not ready to come back to work after 4 days. They don't feel ready to be able to face the world and come back and do exactly what you said, hit the targets and do all of the things. So
what that does is it reduces the quality and the quantity of work.
Absolutely.
Because now you've got a workforce of folks that are not doing well. They're not working well and in wellness, and they haven't been given the space to process grief, and it's impacting them, like Rachel said, in other ways, other physical health issues as well as mental health issues. And then look at the quality of work that's being produced. You know, how many organizations can look back from 2.5 years ago and say, our workforce is producing better quality work than we were 2.5 years ago?
Mm.
We know from working with many organizations, some of the world leading organizations, that the quality of work has been impacted. And we strongly believe, like Rachel said, the root of that is because there is so much unprocessed grief for the humans doing the work.
Yeah. And the quality and quantity, also the quality can be affected. So depending on what kind of work it is, but if it's work that's manual work, this can lead to a lot of accidents that happen, people getting hurt in the workplace, meaning because their memory, they're not as focused, they're not able to do the job, they're thinking about other things, or they're just really, really grief stricken. So accidents happen, and that costs organizations a huge amount of money as well, and therefore lawsuits can happen as well at the same time.
And then there's the interpersonal dynamics that get impacted. The example I just brought up, there's more conflict, there's more tension because people are bottled up with all of these emotions, and they're bringing it to their work relationships, to meetings, to the pressure of getting things done on target and well. And then you're creating a culture of tension and conflict,
Yeah.
which for individuals can start to lead to more addiction, alcohol and drug abuse and other addictions, just to cope so that they
As a way
can.
of coping mechanism. Yeah. A way of being able to cope and deal with it, or suppress it and be and numb the pain or the what they're feeling, not for, and then all of those create financial loss for an organization, huge financial loss. So all of the above are losing organizations a lot of money, and organizations who choose to invest and actually say, you know what, let's change this. What can we do about this loss that we're experiencing? Loss as in financial loss for them. How can we support our people and invest in ways to help people when they're going through grief or loss, are able to not lose those financial losses and find.
So, Rach, what's an example of a grief unsafe work environment, and then a grief safe work environment?
Yeah. And it really, like, you can see organizations that do it well in comparison to the ones that don't. So an organization, let's give an example. A coworker suddenly dies. A coworker on a team dies inside an organization. How does the organization react to that coworker dying? So an organization who's not doing so well, they may, create a donation so that they can send flowers to the family, which is a lovely gesture, of course. They may have some individual conversations with the co-workers, the people that co-worker worked with the most. They might, just check in a little bit with those co-workers, how you doing? But beyond that, not much conversation. And then they might help to redistribute the work that co-worker did. Hey, you take this piece and you take that piece. So that's an example of what an organization who doesn't really have any skills or hasn't thought about this ahead of time would do. Now, an organization that's doing it really well would do a lot of different things. One is that they would actually have already invested in some training for their HR departments or their managers. And when we say training, they would have invested in skills to support their people and their teams in grief. So some grief training and helping them, like you just say, to bring curiosity, listening skills.
Right. So maybe coach training as well, we know, are their communication skills that help bring more humanity into the workplace.
Exactly. So that they are able to provide listening and space for any coworker who's impacted by the loss of their coworker. They would actually create space for all coworkers to be able to come either individually and have conversations with the HR departments or their managers, or as groups, because they've all experienced a loss together. So there could be a level of group coaching that happens for the team. They also might invest, and I've seen organizations who do this beautiful, they would invest in in a grief coach, an actually certified grief coach, and they would offer the employees who have been affected a certain amount of grief coaching sessions that they can have individually. And then they would also make it a priority to create the culture that talks about it. They would not suppress it. They would actually talk about it as an organization. They would talk about it in their teams, and they would talk about it as co-workers rather than suppress it and carry on as normal. So those are like two examples. And you can see, imagine if you were working in one of those organizations, the difference. If that person who you sat next to suddenly isn't there anymore, the difference between actually I can go to my manager or my HR department and I can talk about it with somebody. I can sit down, they're going to listen, they're going to let me express how I'm feeling. I could also talk to people in the coffee room or when we're in meetings and express my grief of how sad I am. V's, okay, just carry on. And actually, yeah, I've got to take so-and-so's work and do it as well while I'm also experiencing this feeling.
That's a great contrast. Thank you for painting the picture of what it looks like to be grief safe and grief unsafe. And I just think that humanity and organizations, we've never been in a time like we are in right now, where there is the unprecedented amount of micro grief that the workers, the individuals who are running and doing the work inside an organization are experiencing. And so we've never had programs to train the people departments or managers in these, because there wasn't as much of a need, although grief was always happening. It's happening at an accelerated rate, and we know one of the positive outcomes of the past 2.5 years is that more organizations realize that there's a whole human doing the work and that we need to provide tools and training. And some of our Rachel, I think, and I would say, like, our clients that we're most inspired by, I'm thinking of two large organizations that we offer coactive coach training, and we offer some of our UpLevel Productions products. They actually have hired mental health professionals to be available for their employees during these unprecedented and wild times. And so they can access a grief coach like Rachel's referring to, or a mental health professional, or they have cadres of internal coaches that have certain areas of specialty.
Skills. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Some are actually focused all around family. It's not just about their leadership development and their work, but if someone is experiencing some challenge within their family, there's a certain cadre of coaches inside that organization that is provided to them.
Yeah.
So we want to big up these organizations, and for organizations that are wanting to provide more solutions like this, we want to let you know that some folks are doing it and they're seeing their return on investment.
I was about to say that they don't have any problems with retention. Their people are not leaving because their people understand and know when I'm experiencing grief or there's some struggle in my life, my organization is there for me. My organization has my back. My organization is going to look after me. And it also means that they're attracting talent. People are like, hey, I actually want to go and work for that organization because I know what they have. I know that they have this expertise. I know that if I'm going to be in having any of these experiences in the future, they're going to look after me again. So they're not struggling with retention or attracting top talent at all.
And then they haven't seen a decline in their business. They're actually, because the culture is healthy, there's more innovation, which means during these times of great transformation, they've been able to create new products that are products that will serve where their marketplace is and how it's evolving, because people have the bandwidth and the creativity and are present enough to continue to innovate. And that's, again, a part of the business case is, as an organization, you want to help people with unresolved grief so that it's been processed so that they have space to be creative and innovative.
Because we as humans can do both. We can be in grief, we can experience grief, and we can also be creative. Again, grief is not this linear process. It ebbs and flows. I lost someone very important to me last week, and it was interesting. And not last week, sorry, last week is when I remembered this person. I lost somebody, but when I wanted to talk to that person because of an experience that was happening last week, and that's when my grief came up more again suddenly. So again, we can be creative. As humans, we can hold many emotions at once, and so we can be creative and do great work at the same time as being grief stricken or having processing grief at the same time.
And it's a beautiful segue, Rich, because grief isn't always sad, depressive. emotions that sometimes can be defined as more negative emotions. We don't see it that way at UpLevel. All emotions are equal and they're all just part of the human experience. But grief can be experienced in gratitude. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's waves of when I think about people near and dear to me, that grief arises because of the gratitude I've felt for them being in my life, you know. And so that's again another important reason why conversations and training around emotions and around grief are important, because it's about redefining what does it mean to bring my whole self to work,
Yeah.
you know. And it's not, it doesn't just look a certain way. And like Rachel was saying, it's not linear, and it, somebody could have lost something or something 2 years ago, but then there was something that happens in a meeting that triggers that emotion or that memory, and they're experiencing deep emotion again.
Yeah. And like you said, it's we don't what was I going to say? Sorry, I just lost my train of thought because I got excited about it. But when we experience grief, it's not always like you said, negative. There's this feeling that we have around an emotion, and a lot of the time we as a society, this is what I was going to say, as a society, we don't talk about grief because we're scared and we don't know how to talk about grief. So let's train people to know how to talk about grief in a safe way. We fear what we don't know in a way. So we think, oh, I can't ask that person how they're feeling about the loss of their mother or their husband because I don't know how to hold space for them. I don't know what to do. So we're fearing it. But actually, you can learn these skills. These are skills that you can learn, how to have a conversation, how to be curious, how to listen. So again, it's not something that's too scary if we train people, and especially in the midst of grief. A lot of the time, a lot of harm can happen where people don't know what to say, and so sometimes they say things that can be harmful, and that then hurts the person even more. So all of these things can be trained. We can teach these things easily.
Let's talk about that, Rach. So we UpLevel Productions, we've got two specific products
Mm-hmm.
that are all around honoring and managing grief in the workplace.
Yeah.
What do we want to say about those?
Yeah, I mean, one of them is especially, like we said, dispelling the myths of grief, what grief is and what grief isn't. So, really helping people to understand what it is and what it isn't. Also, understanding, we haven't mentioned it, but mourning. So, there's grief and then there's mourning. Grief is the internal experience, the emotional experience, and then mourning is the outward expression of that grief. So for some people, that can be crying, that can be the funeral, that's the actual physical expression of your grief. So dispelling the myths of grief, helping to learn and teach people what to not say and what to say, how to get curious, like you said, the coaching skills, how to listen. Those are all around understanding and honoring grief. So that's one of the products that we have at UpLevel Productions. And those specifically can be for HR manager, departments or managers. But in general, actually, that workshop can be for anyone. It can be for communities. It can be for employees. It can be for anyone who is wanting to be more grief safe, as we say.
Another thing that we do at UpLevel is support organizations to design what we call a living wake.
Mm-hmm.
And these are wonderful ceremonies that when someone is retiring or they've chose to leave the organization, and you really want to honor this individual, and as an organization you want to model that this person made a contribution while they were there. It was important. And we believe it's really important to consciously complete. And so we call it a living wake. And one of the things we help our clients do is choreograph and curate a beautiful
Beautiful.
experience that brings together employees to honor this individual and has the organization really ensure this person can walk away knowing that they made a contribution.
And also support the others and allow space for those who maybe feeling sadness. So let's say it's a co-founder or a founder or a CEO who's made a huge impact on loads of people inside that organization, who's now retiring or stepping back, and a new person's coming in. Allow those people who have been led by that human being for a long time to, first of all, express their gratitude or what they saw in that person, allow them to have that completion experience, and allow them to express their loss, again, their grief. Let everyone have an experience of grief together, because again, grief doesn't have to be, like you said, always negative. It can be a beautiful thing at the same time. You're leaving us, but this is the impact you had on me and my life, and this is what I'm going to take away from my relationship with you.
See, all of this takes more time. And often my experience in organizations is that we want to step over these parts because we need to get to the work, which gets us to the results. But because the world has changed, we are taking a stand for that you will actually have more productive time if you create moments of reverence in your workplace. If you create moments of honoring the whole person, and if you take moments, if you take time and an investment to train individuals in your organization to be able to hold space for human moments. And at the end of the day, that is going to speed up time, and that is going to increase business results. We've seen it over and over and over again. And we know that the businesses who are choosing to go that route, to invest in the whole person, they are the organizations that are innovating and that will be sticking around.
Yeah. And the organizations that are proactively doing that ahead of a crisis, or something happening, rather than reactively doing it. Oh my goodness, suddenly this has happened. Now we need to call people and experts in. We need help, and scrambling. What about the organizations that are actually proactively saying, okay, let's invest in a workshop. It's 4-hour workshop, but this is going to equip our managers or our HR department so that if something happens, if we lose a coworker, if something happens in the future, they're ready. They've got equipped with the skills, and we can lean on them, and they can support each other rather than reacting.
And so this is, UpLevel Productions wants to be a part of these conversations with you and with your organizations, because we've had the experience with other clients where we're seeing the impact. And like Rachel just said, let's get ahead of it, because the world has shifted. There are more things happening in a day to each individual than ever happened in a day going a couple years back. And so the ability to be resilient to the change and to the constant barrage of life coming at us is critical. We need to develop resiliency in our people, and we need to develop environments that are grief safe and allow for humanity in the workplace.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I saw the other day, it was interesting. I saw some of the interview questions. So that the most popular interviewee question that's happening right now when trying to attract or interview. So this is when someone's going to an interview and they get that opportunity to ask the organization some questions. One of the first questions that comes out of people's mouth now is, what kind of well-being or wellness programs, what support do you have for me on top of my benefits and health? But what else is the company or organization offering to its employees around that? And so as organizations need to be able to answer that if they want to attract the best talent.
So with that being said, we encourage you to connect to UpLevel Productions to go deeper into this conversation with us. Know that we can curate events around honoring grief in the workplace or transitions, creating living wakes, as we call it, conscious completions. And then something that Rachel is super steeped in is actually helping your organization become grief safe.
Yep.
How do you create your team of the folks that are managing the people processes, as well as people leaders, have those specific skills?
Yeah, exactly.
The other way that we'll just do a plug for right now is we have a children's book coming out soon. And it is part of the Adventures of Little Sass franchise, which is a book series that focuses on emotional wellness for children and adults. And we've launched 3 books in 2018, The Emotion of Anger, Sadness, and Joy. And with everything that's happened over the past couple of years, Rachel and I have collaborated on the next book, which is Little Amina and the Adventure of Grief.
Yes. So, as Christy mentioned, this is part of my purpose and passion in life, to not only equip organizations in being grief safe, but how do we raise our children to be able to process the emotion of grief? So this book is about a little girl who's experiencing grief, the loss of her mother. And my hope is that this book helps to help any child who's going through grief, any sort of grief, and starts to again have us have conversations, parents having conversations with children, educators having conversations with children, and communities having more conversations about grief.
So stay tuned for that. You'll definitely see us on the socials as we prepare for the launch of Little Amina and the Adventure of Grief. And in the interim, Rachel and I would love to speak to you about creating your organization to be grief safe,
Yeah.
creating living wakes inside your organization. And all around, we just want to encourage you to really think about, as an individual, whatever role you are in, whether you are an employee inside an organization or you're a consultant or a coach externally supporting organizations, how are you creating spaces for people to bring their full self and to process, honor, and manage grief in the workplace?
Yeah.
We're so committed to creating environments like that. And so we're asking you to think about, how are you contributing to that?
And not only how are you contributing to that for others, how are you allowing your own grief? How are you airing and letting your own grief come up? Whether it be talking to someone that you love and you feel safe with, or just recognizing that you're feeling sadness or loss or joy or gratitude because of a loss, and letting it come out. Give it some airtime.
Give it some airtime. So, with that, thank you everybody for tuning in today. We hope you watch this replay, and we'll be sharing more tools on this. We do have a managing and honoring grief in the workplace PDF that we've created. You can go to the www.uplevelproductions.com website, and you will find it under the resource page. You can download it for free. That's going to give you a good place to start. And then we'll look forward to hearing from you to continue the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming to learn, love, and up level with us. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Christy.